what kind of leadership mindset is required in this day and age to be able to address the developmental challenges that the world is facing in Africa, in developing countries, in SADC. I hope that at the end you'll be able to appreciate that by consensus, and you'll also see and come up with individually and collectively with some kind of understanding and approach as to how you can individually contribute towards making an input in solving some of these challenging problems that the globe is facing, because it requires not only governments to solve some of these problems, it also requires communities and, above all, even individuals. We must play a significant role in contributing towards making the world a better place. And you, as young leaders, have got a tremendous role to play in that respect. So, briefly then, can you tell me which are some of the greatest leaders that you can remember? Quickly. Gandhi, Mandela, Jacob Zuma, Mugabe, Jomo Kenyatta, Lumumba, NASA, James, Sengho, Shagari. Any other ones? Who? Martin Luther King, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Okay. Now, you can see that, how many of you been able to count? About 15? Can we go up to 50? Very easily. Can we? Can we go up to 100? Eh? No, you can't. Can you go to 200? So the more you go, the less it becomes to identify great leaders. Now, second question. What qualities do these people have? What kind of qualities do these people have that you subscribe to them as being great leaders? They were visionary, statesmanship, integrity, honesty, humility, wisdom. What is that? Persistence, forward-looking, strong personality, discipline, strong actors, character, leadership skills, whatever that means, yes? Compassion, patience, wisdom, determination, privilege. I'll put a question mark. What else? Perseverance, resilience, endurance, wisdom. Okay, good. So, do you possess those qualities yourselves? Do you possess those qualities? Don't be afraid. Do you aspire to have those qualities? Yes, you should. Absolutely, that's good. That's why, otherwise you would not be here. Mark, they would not be here. So, that's excellent. And this is the beginning of that journey that you are in here, to try and work towards those very, very important goals that those leaders had. Some of you have already started that. This is a journey. You're going to go through this journey for a long time in your own personal lives, in your work, in your situations, and you should always subscribe to those values and those virtues to become good leaders. And I wish you all the best in that journey. And that journey is not going to end here. Next question. Yvette, can you give them the papers, please? Just distribute those. Give somebody to help you to distribute that. Give them to somebody to help you to distribute them, please. Give somebody to... Okay. Once that has been done, I'll tell you why I've distributed that paper. For those of you that do not know, and I hope you'll know now, you'll realize that the world in which we live in order for it to be able to address some challenges that it faces, countries have realized that they cannot prosper and develop on their own. The same thing with individuals. We all need one another to be able to enhance our potential. As individuals, as communities, and as nations, we need to do that. No one can develop and grow on their own. So, countries have realized the importance of pulling together their resources to be able to improve and grow. To this effect, you find groupings like the EU, which has taken a long process of the 27 nations to pull their resources together, both human and capital and everything else, to have a very powerful union that addresses development challenges for Europe. The United Nations is also an organization that brings all countries together to reach consensus on addressing issues of global importance. The African Union, on the other side, is also that kind of an organization. The Southern African Development Corporation, which is a corporation or a community of 14 Southern African states in Southern Africa. This region, ECOWAS in the West, although this regional groupings are members of the AU and members of the United Nations, they have realized the importance of grouping together to share a common vision and mission of development to address the challenges that they face, because it is important for them to do so, despite the fact that they are diverse in their culture, in their beliefs, in their development, and everything. Nevertheless, they've realized that it is important to solve their problems and their challenges together. What are the challenges that the Southern African Development Corporation faces currently? There are a number of them, but I'll just mention about 5 of them, which are very, very paramount to their success, to improving the quality of lives of their people. Because any development that does not relate to improving the quality of life of its people is not development. All development must, as its end point, be the well-being of its people. Any development that does not do that is not development. Any development that happens must, as an end point, be the improvement of the quality of life of its people. So, whatever you do, when you build up roads, provide water supply and sanitation, improve your information communication technology, the end effect of that, any kind of development, is to make sure that your people become better and improve their quality of life. So, and in the tall order, what are some of those challenges that the Southern African Development Community faces? One, most important one, is good governance. Good governance in terms of good economic and corporate governance. They've identified that as a very, very important factor or a vehicle for their development to address economic and corporate governance. Secondly, is to work towards integration and development. Integration and development enablers. To work towards that. And which are those enablers? Fighting against HIV/AIDS. You'll realize that the southern countries, the whole epicenter of HIV/AIDS is in this region. More than 23% of people infected with HIV/AIDS are within the Southern Africa or in the SADC region, ranging from 25% to 14%. This is the epicenter. So one of the biggest challenges that the region faces is to fight the scourge of HIV/AIDS. It's a big, big, big problem. Secondly, gender mainstreaming and women empowerment. Because women constitute some of the most vulnerable people within the SADC region. So must make sure that we have programs that address this inequality. In most countries, women spend about 60% of their time looking for nothing else except water and wood for their daily life. I mean, that is a terrible source of misuse of time, where 60% of one's time is spent only on doing two activities. And most of the women in developing countries and in Africa spend about 60% of their time looking for water and firewood, as opposed to doing something else that is productive for them to improve their quality of life. This inequality must be addressed. Another developmental enabler is the private sector development. No country can improve without the private sector taking an active part in the process. So the private sector is very, very important, and the non-governmental organizations are also very, very important. The governments only should be able to provide regulatory frameworks that are conducive to enhance the private sector to be the vehicle that drives the economy. Clear example of that is this country where you are, Germany. Germany is where it is because of the tremendous input of the private sector into the economy. In fact, for all intents and purposes, Germany does not need a government. It can do without a government because the foundations are there. The private sector, thank you very much. Oh, wonderful. I thought it was, is this vodka? So, private sector development, trade liberalization, diversification of the regional economies. Those enablers are the ones that have been also identified for the SADC region. Poverty alleviation and creation, poverty eradication, and the equitable development within the region. We have a very skewed development within the region where, for instance, at the top you have South Africa, and at the bottom you have countries like Lesotho and Malawi, where there's a huge gap in terms of development. So the community has found this to be a challenge to bridge this gap. And that gap is not only in SADC, but you see it in the whole of developing countries. You see it in the whole world. Ultimate challenge for world leaders and yourselves is how can we be able to bridge this gap between the rich and poor? What innovative strategies and mechanisms can we do to bridge this gap between the rich and poor so that all of us can benefit from the resources that we have? It's not an easy, I don't have the answers, by the way. I don't have the answers. If I had the answers, I'll give them to you. In the region, 40% of the people live below what is called the poverty line, or live in dire poverty. Dire poverty. Has everybody else got that list? I mean, that piece of paper? How many don't have? Okay, it doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, give them some. Now, what I would like you to do, as I'm talking and as you're listening, I would like you to, on that piece of paper on one side, to write 5, what you consider to be 5 major global challenges that we are facing. 5, just 5. What do you consider to be the 5 most pressing global challenges that we are facing? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just 5. Just 5. Not more. Okay. And then we'll come back to that, what you have written. Because at the end, we'll reach a consensus. Anyway, I believe that cultural diplomacy, as has been defined in the past couple of days here by yourselves and the lecturers here, has a tremendous role to play in addressing most of the developmental challenges that I have mentioned earlier about the SADC region. Not only the SADC region, but I think even what the ambassador of Nigeria mentioned earlier on and what has been discussed. Cultural diplomacy is a good vehicle, a catalyst to addressing the challenges that we face. History, as I said earlier on, has taught us that one cannot prosper without the other, and that no growth can be possible without the support of the other, both on an individual basis, and you cannot improve and develop if you ignore the other. You ignore the other at your own peril. And countries have realized this, that in order to improve their make the good relations with one another, they have to have exchange of ideas and views, and have to make sure that they understand the other nations as to how they think, why they think like that, what strengths they have, what weaknesses they have, and then on the basis of that unity, they can be able to address problems. That is the essence of diplomacy. That is the essence of cultural diplomacy. This is where cultural diplomacy comes into it, because it can be used, and it has been used as a good vehicle to break the ice and to break things that would have led to deterioration in the relations between countries. And we have seen where cultural diplomacy was not used as a vehicle for understanding, as exemplified in the issue of attacking on Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. That was where it failed to be used. This very, very powerful tool to be able to understand and create a mechanism for dialogue and understanding and resolving issues peacefully. Cultural diplomacy works on that basis, as it has been defined by yourselves here through the discussion that I wish we have had. You have been able to define what culture means and also what diplomacy is. You know, if we define then culture as the sum aggregate of beliefs, values, understanding of time and space, which people individually and collectively understand to define themselves over a period of time, those would constitute what culture is. Those things that form an aggregate of knowledge about space and time and defining religion, defining the arts and everything else, would say, this is the German culture, this is the Lesotho culture, this is the Nigerian culture, this is African culture. All those things that have gone on over a period of time being transferred from generation to generation. And diplomacy as an art and practice of conducting international relations to understand one another for the mutual benefit of both countries. So cultural diplomacy with all those things would help all those things that I've mentioned to be able to play as a catalyst for development. And indeed, you would then see that the understanding in the context of the SADC, where with diverse countries, diverse languages, diverse culture, if you understand the culture of the Zulus, of the Basotos, of Seychelles, of Madagascar, of Zambia, of Malawi, etc., countries are able to understand and be much more tolerant, much more acceptable. It freezes the barriers. It's an enabler for building up trust, an enabler for building up respect, tolerance, for the mutual benefit of both on a win-win basis. And through that, countries can develop and fulfill their growth and developmental objectives, only in the realization of the importance of culture. So, the issue of, for instance, where the EU has dialogue with the African Union helps both countries on a mutual basis for the EU to understand the perspective of the African Union's position. On the other side, the African country also understands Europe as most powerful economic bloc. What are the opportunities that can arise? It is only through that, and it took more than 2-3 years to reach a consensus to meet in Lisbon for the EU and the AU. But once they sat down and discussed and met, they found out that, oh my goodness, we can actually develop to our own mutual benefit. And they have. They've broken the ice. They can be able to deal on an equal basis to address the developmental challenges that we have. So cultural diplomacy then opens greater doors for opportunities in terms of exchange of ideas, information, art, lifestyles, values. It fosters mutual understanding and growth for not only individuals, but for communities and countries alike. And as I mentioned earlier, these have been used by international organizations like the United Nations organizations through UNESCO, for instance. The African Union also uses that, the EU does that, and leads to trust, respect, understanding, tolerance, breaks the barriers, and leads to growth. There are challenges, however, that are being faced in this prospect in terms of utilizing cultural diplomacy as a vehicle for development. One being that cultural diplomacy is never seen as an enabler for development by most countries, including mine. It's never seen as an enabler for that, despite the fact that history has shown that it has and will play an important role in bridging and fostering people's understanding. Countries like the United States has used cultural diplomacy very, very effectively in advancing the American, spirit of the American culture through the United States Information Service, Britain through the British Council, Germany through the Goethe Institute, France through the Alliance Française, etc. And a host of other countries, China with its panda diplomacy and the ping-pong diplomacy and so on, This, through music, through arts, exchange programs, language, they have been able to foster greater understanding and even avert wars. So you are an important vehicle also individually and as a group to play to address some of those issues. And I wish you all the best. So for countries in Africa and developing countries, and in particular in the SADC region, it is important that these countries should be able to define themselves. They should not be defined by somebody else. They should define themselves. Define themselves. In particular, Africa should be able to define itself not only as a country or as a continent of savages, as a continent that is infested with corruption, as a continent that has concomitant disasters, death, doom, and gloom, has to define itself as being, notwithstanding that, a continent that is on the rise. And that can be done, one of the vehicles that can be done is through the recognition and advocacy of cultural diplomacy. It can play a significant role in that because it fosters greater understanding between nations, between people, for development. A pause. Have you written the 5 things? Can you collect them, please? And then help to collect them. And then I would request somebody, I would request here, Yvette, that a piece of paper, you should actually then see what are those problems, and then see the numbers. Then we'll be able to, let's analyze them and see at the end. Before I finish, so that we can have some discussions, the creation of Lesotho as a country, most of you probably would wonder, how come that a country like Lesotho, relatively very small, I didn't say small, I said relatively, mark my word, relatively small, inside a relatively big country, South Africa, has been able to survive as a country within that. Reasons are very simple. Simple in the sense that, just analyze them and see which ones, and group them and make sure that, have somebody to help you. So, and the reason have been very simple. Lesotho was created not as a nation. It did not exist as a nation right from the beginning. We were created out of immigrants who were persecuted through wars that range in the Southern Africa by Shaka the Zulu. So people ran from his tyrannical rule and moved away in the whole of Southern Africa, and hunger was one of the biggest problems. And Mushweshwe the Great gave refuge to these people who were running away from the massacres of tribal conflicts that happened at that time, and provided them with food and shelter and clothing and everything else that would make them to live and lead at least a reasonable life as opposed to where they came from. So we are a nation of refugees ourselves. We know what this means. So, and he had great values. And one of those values that he maintained at all the time to make sure that Lesotho still existed up to now, once it was created, were based on forgiveness. Forgiveness, sharing, peace, and unity. Those are the foundations and the cornerstones of his philosophy. Forgiveness, sharing, peace, and unity. This is what has kept us together. This is why our national motto is peace, reign, and prosperity. And out of that, we have been able to hold together amidst all odds. That's how we managed to stay, even in the worst of times during the apartheid regime. Those four things kept us together. And we played a significant role also in the fight against that regime. And for that, we are very thankful. In conclusion, I would like to say that you have an opportunity, as I said. You should always remember that you have a role to play, and you can do it. You should think, what is it that I can be of use to mankind, to my community, to where I am? What positive things can I instill all the time? What qualities should I be able to have in order to unleash my potential and be a good person? And you remember that you cannot achieve this once. It is a journey that is going to be difficult and tough, but an enjoyable journey in leadership. A journey that is a gift to you, because some leaders get leadership as a gift. Most of them are chosen, but it's still a gift. It's a gift, and what do you have to do with that gift? It's a gift that is given to you, and you have to give it in return. Give it also to other people. You should not hold it to yourself. Give it to other people. Bring the best out of them and make sure that they can also become leaders. Thank you.